If you got questions, throw them in the chat box. I do think this session will be a little bit more interactive, so at some points along the way, we might go ahead and unmute folks to participate. So just be aware that that might be something that we do as part of this session as well. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Sylvia Cheuy. Sylvia is a consulting director of the Tamarack Institute's Collective Impact Idea Area. She's passionate about community change and what becomes possible when residents and various sector leaders share an aspirational vision for their future. Sylvia believes that when the assets of residents and community are recognized and connected, they become powerful drivers of community change. Prior to joining Tamarack, Sylvia was the founding executive director to Headwaters Communities in Action, or HCIA, a grassroots citizens initiative that fosters collaborative leadership and action in support of a long-term vision of well-being for Ontario's Headwaters region. This experience gives Sylvia a practical knowledge and first-hand experience of what it takes to engage and mobilize positive community change. Her work with HCIA was published as a chapter entitled A Citizen-Led Approach to Enhancing Community Wellbeing in the newly published Handbook of Community Wellbeing Research. Sylvia completed her master's diploma in social innovation at the University of Waterloo in 2013, where she explored opportunities to create change within regional food systems. An active volunteer in her community, Sylvia served as a member of HCIA's Leadership Council. She also served for 9 years on the board of Community Living Dufferin, where she was instrumental in securing $2.8 million in funding for the CLD's shared home with Theatre Orangeville, the community's professional theatre company. Sylvia lives in Caledon, Ontario, with her husband, Scott Graham, and their 3 children, Gabriella, Garrett, and Sean. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much, Megan. What a great introduction. I don't know how many of you I had the opportunity to meet last year when I had the privilege of being at the LCAN gathering well, it was probably about this time last year, right? But I'm so thrilled to be back with you. The session that we want to focus on today, I'm just going to pull up my screen, is about navigating change. Kind of fitting for right now. So what I want to do is sort of frame out a little bit for us about what that means and some strategies, and then we're going to play with a very useful tool that will help make sense of options for people, make that a little clearer and more tangible, and hopefully it's something that might give you insights around your own work for your LCAN, and or something that you could envision then replicating and bringing back to your LCAN table and trying out. You know, for me, since we're not all in the same room, it's really useful and helpful to ground ourselves and take a moment and catch our breath and reflect on where we are, each one of us, and the land that we call home. And I do want to really acknowledge the generations of Indigenous people that have made where I currently live home, and acknowledge and honor their wisdom, contributions, and courage as Canada continues its truth and reconciliation journey with Indigenous people. I would invite you all also to take a breath and reflect on where you are, wherever you are, and feel free to chime into the chat box. What do you call home? And who are the ancestors and settlers to whom you are honoring their past and their contributions? This is me. You'll get these slides in a folder after, so if there are questions, if you're about to try the tool and you just want to double check something, please reach out to me, and I do my best to get back to people as quickly as I can. For those of you who don't know or want to know more, the Tamarack Institute is a Canadian national charity, but we have tons of free webinars, tools, and resources aimed specifically at people like you who are community change makers and looking for new approaches and new ways to bring people together to tackle tough and tenacious issues and problems. So we have a poll. Let me just do a bit of a check-in with our participants. If you could help me launch the poll, I'd love each one of us to take a look at these different images, there's 6, and give me, just choose the one that best represents where you're at right this moment.
Got some answers coming in. I'll give it a few more seconds here.
Beautiful. Well, the overwhelming winner, the tangled yarn. So good. I think, you know what? I completely understand where we all might be in this. Have you seen the results? There you go. So, but overwhelmingly. Well, let's try and spend some time thinking and talking together and seeing if we can't sort of help sort out some of that tangled yarn and give you some options for how you might want to think about that. For me specifically, what I'd love to do is introduce you to some thinking and frameworks for how we at Tamarack are thinking about navigating these disruptive times that we all find ourselves in, and then talk about some tools and frameworks for how you can adapt the strategies that your LCAN has been moving forward in the face of uncertainty and unpredictability, and then invite us all to share some insights, reflections, and stuff with one another about what might be needed to help us move forward stronger together. So yes, we are certainly living in a time of, I think, unprecedented disruption. And in fact, it's not just one disruption, but it would seem that disruptions are coming with greater and greater frequency. There's this real sense that when these disruptions come, right, they take us from a place where we're feeling buffeted by forces that seem beyond our control, and it can also be overwhelming. And the fear is real, right, for some of us. And so is the beauty that we see and the generosity that we see, and both are coexisting together. I really love this visual. Contributed to us by my colleague Mark Kabaj from Here to There Consulting, who's an associate with us at Tamarack. And really what's interesting is when there's a huge disruption, as the pandemic would be a perfect example of, you know, we go through this time of uncertainty, and there's a whole range of different potential paths that we could choose, right? So one is, do we kind of just cope with the disruption in the hope that we're going to have a chance quickly to return to the old normal and fall back into that groove? Do we bounce out of the groove that we're in and really start creating a new equilibrium? Or are we going to kind of bounce into a new equilibrium, but then then endure another disruption and another disruption? And the truth is, we don't know. But I do find it helpful to really think about the fact that, you know what? We've all have experience navigating disruptions. Anyone who's become a parent knows. Anyone who's adopted a puppy, for heaven's sake, right? Suddenly, even if it's a beautiful thing, it kind of throws life into chaos. When you've moved to a new community or you're starting a new job. And then there's we've all walked through the global economic downturn in 2008 together. We all walked through the horror that was 9/11. You know, we do know, each and every one of us knows how to go through a disruption and come through the other side. Sometimes it's helpful to ground in that. Sometimes it's helpful to remember in those other disruptive times, what were the things that you needed that really helped you kind of restore yourself or ground yourself so that you felt, you know, what helped you think through new options, that kind of thing. What do you know about yourself and what you need to navigate that time? Certainly, you know, how we choose to experience what's happening to us has a profound effect on the options that we see. And so what mindset do you do you find yourself in? And there are three very typical ones. The victim, oh no, here we go again. These things are happening to me and I can't respond. There's a survivor, which is hunker down. Let's not do anything disruptive. Let's just wait it out and see what happens. And then there's, people who have the ability, and I think at least reflecting on myself, I've been in all three of those places, sometimes even all three places in one day, right? But really it's what I'm inviting you to with this conversation is to think about how could you capitalize on the changes that are in front of you. What new opportunities get created because of this change. My colleague Liz Weaver just recently wrote a paper about collective impact post-pandemic. And what I really liked about how she framed out the paper was she was really thinking about three stages, and they kind of overlap for how we respond at a time of a disruption. So of course, when something happens, the immediate first reaction is to respond. And it's about, what help is needed? How do we mobilize for safety? Is my family okay? Is my organization okay? Is my community okay? What else do we need to be thinking about? What can we do differently? After we adapt to the shock of it, we turn our minds to thinking about recovery, and we pause and we reflect, and we have to think about, as we think about recovery, what kind of a recovery are we planning for? Are we going to hope that it goes back to the way we were before? Or, as one of our board members wrote a great paper about not letting a good crisis go to waste. What new things were created as a response to this crisis that actually are sowing seeds for something we've wanted for a long time to see happen, and now what do? Right? How do we make sure that the best of our responses get baked into what a new reality looks like post-recovery? And then lastly, when times of disruption happen, like the pandemic, what we also see as some structural flaws in the way we've set things up that, many of us have maybe felt we didn't have the time or the capacity to shift and change. And now suddenly, we're realizing we've got to do more to build the resilience within local communities and or within our own organizations to be able to respond and navigate to these kinds of things. And so what new capacities do we need to nurture and support for each other? I also love this thinking. Comes from an editorial in one of our papers recently, which is how do you make the best solutions generated in the recovery around the pandemic to stick? How do you first see them, and then how do you make them stick? So really unify within and across movements. I think that's a beautiful thought and idea. Who else is now mobilized and aligning closer to the kinds of things that you've been working to achieve? Imagination is way better than just incrementally looking at how do we make our normal better. What kind of a caring society do we want? Like, that's a huge and evocative question, rather than how do we cope with where we find ourselves. Engaging people's hearts as well as their minds is critical. Making sense of where the politics is going, and by that I mean small p politics, like really reimagining what the relationships could look like between different sectors. And then really, what are the learnings, insights, and new ways of things that we've seen that we really want to see move us forward ahead. I love this Convening framework. I think it comes from the work of David Snowden, who's a bit of a complexity expert. And why I like it is it really helps to say, the strategies that you use will need to shift and change depending on the kind of environment you find yourself in. So if you're in a situation that is relatively simple, you'll know because the relationship between cause and effect is well known and it's obvious to all. So really, if that's the kind of situation you find yourself in, that's when relying on best practice makes good sense. If you find yourself in a more complicated situation, you'll know you're there because the relationship between cause and effect isn't completely obvious and requires some analysis or other form of investigation or expert knowledge to help make sense of, and then we can chart a path forward. In situations like that, relying on good practice that others have discovered or the wisdom of experts can be really useful and helpful. Complexity. In an environment of complexity, the relationship between cause and effect can only be perceived in hindsight. So that means we don't know the relationship between cause and effect, but we have some good guesses. And so in situations like that, it makes sense to probe, so kind of explore, wonder, pause, reflect, make sense of what's going on, and then determine which possible pathways might make sense and which one do we want to experiment with first. And then lastly, there's the chaotic, where the relationship between cause and effect is actually happening at the systems level. We may not have a lot of control over what's happening. And in situations like that, it's important to take action based on the information you have in front of you, pause and make sense of the impact of that action, and then figure out if that's the best response. So you're actually crafting a new practice. And that's kind of the realm that we're probably finding ourselves in to a large extent. So I'm going to pause there and just invite any and all of you in the chat box, if you don't mind, go ahead and chime in and let us know if there are comments or questions on this kind of thinking and way of thinking before we dive into going further. Any comments, any questions? Alex, raise your hand. Go ahead. Can we unmute Alex?
Yes. Go ahead, Alex.
The question is, do you want to unmute Alex?
Yes, of course we do. No hesitation at all.
The biggest problem that we've been having, because I work in education specifically, is the school districts are all completely in a dither. You cannot, ask anything of them. I mean, do you have any advice on, besides, backing off slowly and letting them figure their own thing out? What can we do to be not a burden to them, but at the same time make ourselves available to help?
That's a great question. I kind of went somewhere else, and maybe one of the best places to think about where you could go is, I think that you have relationships directly in community, through the work of the LCANs, as I understand it. And I wonder if helping to identify needs, helping to identify, what communities have and what they're really looking for, what their worries are, and helping to be a bridge between, those that the education sector is hoping to serve and themselves. Like, they are running around trying to sort of sort things out. Maybe they need to have perspectives and other voices, and maybe you can play an important role in inviting community comment, but then synthesizing the patterns and themes about what community has, what community needs, what community wants, and being a trusted messenger of those messages into the education system. Because you're right, in chaos, the temptation for them will be to hunker down and turn inward. And in fact, part of the real value of finding new solutions might be around looking outward. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
But let's move on, because I think this tool we're going to play with might actually be an interesting exercise to help. It might generate some other options as well. If people don't have, and if people have questions, other questions, what I would ask is go ahead and keep typing them in the chat box, and we will come back to them as well. So I am a huge fan of this network called Liberating Structures. There are 33 road-tested facilitation tools that invite people to think differently. And so you're going to experience one of them. And they also have a range of others that they're experimenting with. But I really love this tool. It's called the Critical Uncertainties tool. So this is kind of technically how it works. You invite people to generate and brainstorm a list of uncertainties about, you know, the environment that they're working in that are key to their success, but actually are likely to be difficult, if not impossible, to predict and control. So you brainstorm those, and then you pick the top two that you seem to think are most critical for you and your group right now, and you put them on a matrix, and then you do work with and plan around the 4 scenarios that get generated by the matrix. It sounds technical, but let's give it a go. So let's say I was a business, and the success of my business really, really depended on my ability to generate new and develop new products and get them quickly to market. And the top 2 uncertainties for me are how strong my organization's product development pipeline is. And the second big concern that gets in the way of my success as a business is patent protection. If I'm in a place where there's strong patent protection, then the novel products that my organization and I develop, they're going to stay competitive for quite some time. So if in that case, right, I would create and plot on a matrix a new product pipeline that's gushing or a new product pipeline that's trickling. So 2 extremes of that first concern. And then the other part of the matrix is weak patent protection, strong patent protection. And then what I do is I think, okay, so scenario 1, I've got a gushing product pipeline and strong patent protection. Wow, what's that reality look like for me? What would I title it? What are some of the things that are going on? What are people feeling in the organization when we're in that scenario? And what are the strategies and tactics that we're going to rely on to maximize benefit for ourselves in that scenario? Okay, then we jump to the next one, right? I'm in an environment with strong patent protection, but I've got a trickling pipeline. What would I call that scenario? What would be going on? What would we be thinking and doing? And then think about what strategies and tactics would we as an organization want to mobilize to navigate this reality? And also thinking about, are there partners out there? Are there things that we need that we could lean in on and get from other partners? Because that might hint at some new collaboration. So you kind of get the sense, right? You go all the way around all quadrants. So before coming onto this call, I brainstormed with the team, the planning team, and we came up with one because we didn't want to spend a lot of time coming up with that for you today. So we decided that the 2 critical issues that we wanted to kind of use to create scenarios would be secondary and or post-secondary completion. So one end of the continuum, you'll see at the top, we've got increasing rates of secondary and post-secondary completion. And at the bottom, we've got decreasing rates of secondary and post-secondary completion. And then the other uncertainty we plotted was that the coronavirus is contained versus the coronavirus being uncontained. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I'd love to do now is if we take a look at our whole list of participants. I think we've got, what, about 20 participants? Is that right? Oh, we've got closer to 30. Okay, so tell you what, can we, if we've got about 20 attendees, can we, the top 5 of you, can everybody see in the chat box who all the attendees are? Okay, I'm going to just randomly, Alex, Angela Backhouse, Anna Rowling, Clara Lopez, and Donna Llewellyn. Can you be scenario 1? Okay, Gayla Hunter, Jackie Hunter, Jeanette Sink, and Jen Wilson. Can you be scenario 2? Jerry, Jill Baumeister, and Jill Artiser, and Katrina. Can you be scenario 3? And then the rest, if you haven't heard your name, Kim Booth, Kim Warren, Lee Chen, Michelle Sackville, Robert Nalen, Shane. Can you be scenario 4? And Teresa and Tina, can you be scenario 4 as well? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to do this. Because we can't go into breakout rooms, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is ask you to think for yourself, and then we'll open up the lines and have a quick conversation and map it. Your first job for your scenario is brainstorm. What's the title of this reality? What's the scenario going to be called? Second, I want you to brainstorm a couple of descriptors about what is happening in this scenario. What's it looking like? What's it feeling like? What's going on? And where I want you to spend the most time is I want you to generate a list of strategies and tactics that you would recommend that your LCANs employ to help survive and or thrive in that reality. And if you're struggling with that, think about what are some of the things that you'd be investing in, where would you be spending your time, what would you need, and from other people to help you adapt and thrive, okay? So I'm just going to do a quick time check now. Could we, can I give you till 3:40? Can I give you 10 minutes to brainstorm this and then we'll start capturing it? But first, let me just double check. Is everybody, can you raise your hands and let me know if you are clear about what you're having to do? Brainstorm for the scenario you were assigned, the title, the description, but most importantly, some strategies that you would use as an LCAN to survive and thrive in that reality.
Sylvia, I'm wondering,
raise your hand. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Megan.
I was just wondering if maybe it would be helpful if I went ahead and added into the chat box for like scenario 1, just as a reminder, this is what your scenario is, or for team, for group 1, this is your scenario, group 2, this is your scenario, so people have a reference.
I think that's a great idea. We're getting a couple requests for that.
So Sylvia, can you remind me again what scenario 1 is? Oh, Sylvia, we've lost your audio.
Sorry, can I stop my share and have you bring up the Jamboard?
Sure.
Because I think that'll really help. Let's go there, and then everyone can see it. All right, scenario 1, you have increasing rates of secondary and post-secondary completion, and COVID is, oops, there we go, and COVID is contained. That's you guys, scenario 1. Scenario 2, COVID is contained, but we've got decreasing rates of secondary and post-secondary completion. Scenario 3, we've got decreasing rates of secondary and post-secondary completion, and COVID is not contained. Okay? And then scenario 4, you're living in a world where we have increasing rates of secondary and post-secondary, but the virus is not contained. Are we clear? And I'm going to get us to maybe go, if you go back one screen, Megan, because all we need in the first one is that title and description. Oh, that's right. That's right. No, I'm wrong. You're right. So 10 minutes, just jot down your notes. And then I will check in about 10 minutes. Make sense? And don't forget, you're coming up with the name, you're describing what's going on, but spend most of your time on what strategies and tactics would your LCAN use to cope and thrive in that scenario.
We do have at least one participant that can't see the other attendees based on the functionality that they have. And so I just suggested that they spend the 10 minutes sort of jotting things down individually until we come back to the group. So if anyone else is experiencing that, I would suggest that as well. Does that sound okay?
That sounds perfect. So yeah, this is just an individual brainstorm, and then we'll unmute and co-create from the different ideas that you've come up with, depending on the scenario group. Okay, folks, just want to give you a 3-minute warning before we call us all back together. Yes, I am. Okay, folks, can I gather us back? All right. Can we hear? Let's unmute everybody. And for those of you that focused in that first scenario, where we had increasing secondary and post-secondary completion rates in Iowa, and the virus is contained, what titles did you come up with?
It might take just a second for us to get folks unmuted.
Okay. I can do that, I think. Can I?
I'm working on it right now.
Aha. Well, while we're waiting, people can put ideas for the title of scenario 1 into the chat box. How about we do that? Are we unmuted or no?
I think everyone has the ability to talk now if they
They just have to unmute themselves. Okay. As good as it gets. Ooh la la. Like that. So what did you come up with in terms of what was going on in that scenario? Anyone who was doing thinking about it, or if you're just sort of, you're welcome to chime in even if you weren't in that group. What's going on in that scenario for people?
You're talking about scenario 1?
Yep, where we have high rates of secondary and post-secondary completion, and COVID is contained.
I called it the deluge. I mean, the biggest problem you've got is traffic control.
Oh, lovely. Okay. I'm going to make it, maybe you can make it wider, I think. Yeah. There we go. Perfect. All right. So what's going on in that scenario for LCAN? What are you up to? What does it look like? What's it feel like? What are people focused on? What are they worried about?
Engaging new partners.
All right. What else?
Sense of relief, and maybe a feeling of exhaustion and looking for ways to energize for this big opening that is in front of us.
Right. Good. Anybody celebrating? Woohoo!
Oh, yeah.
All right. What else is going on? Anything?
We're gearing up for, a return to things like, in face, in person career exploration. We're able to give people choices, I think, at this point, because things like Zoom worked for a lot of people. So we navigated that. Maybe we are able to give people more choices.
Beautiful. Okay. How about scenario 2? So that's the scenario where COVID is contained, but we're seeing decreasing rates of secondary, post-secondary completion. What's this scenario called? What's our title? Oops. Is that your title?
With we can get back on track.
All right, we can, back on track. All right, what's going on in this scenario?
Well, I think people are back to school, but they've lost focus on the future or lost direction and thinking about the future right now because they're just back to school.
Okay. And also maybe that loss of direction is because we don't have a handle on how things are permanently different, right? In the world.
Yes.
And maybe it's, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it could be also because the economy might be rebounding, so jobs are plentiful and people are choosing work over education.
Okay. And Jen, you had one?
Donna had one. I'm in another group, but I thought
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
we need to reach out to those students who maybe had dropped out, who took a gap, who struggled, who delayed for whatever reason. We've got to identify them, reach out to them, and re-engage.
Right, okay. So re-engagement is huge. Okay, let's just now leap, if we can, to scenario 3. So this is the scenario where what we're seeing is COVID is not contained and we're facing decreases in secondary, post-secondary. What do we call this scenario?
Cling to hope.
Beautiful. Okay. What's going on for us in our LCANs?
I would say this is the time to reinvent education and try and find a way to funnel more people into online instruction.
Right. Is this a time when we align with other groups who are advocating for better rural equity access to internet?
Oh, yes.
Right, because it's going to get in the way? What else? Anybody have anything else here to describe, or are we ready to go to 4? Let's go to 4. So this is a scenario where we're seeing increasing secondary, post-secondary completions, but COVID isn't contained in any way. What are we calling this? about bittersweet victory? What's going on here for us and LCANs generally, folks in our network?
So when I thought about this scenario, I was thinking about how post-secondary enrollment usually increases as unemployment increases. So my kind of thought scenario here was that as COVID is running rampant, unemployment is going up. So more people are enrolling and completing post-secondary education.
Right, interesting. What do we think? What else do we think?
I'm going to jump in and say I think that we're revising career pathways.
Okay. Let's get one more.
Learning is still happening online, and so I think we're helping students navigate success in an online environment.
I would suspect also we're more comfortable as instructors in an online environment, so there may be more options, like there may be more and willingness to invest in creative teaching methodologies. I'm mindful of time, so are we able to maybe leap to the next one as soon as you're done, poor Megan? Because I'm really curious about, for scenario one, as good as it gets, where did we end up in terms of strategies to navigate?
Well, I said this was an opportunity to make sure, first of all, to address the summer melt, right? We've got good post-secondary and we've got good secondary completion, but we want to make sure they get from secondary to post-secondary. And then on the other end of the spectrum, start engaging more local employers to have jobs ready for the graduates as they start coming through.
So then one of the strategies then is you're really ramping up your contact with employers?
Yes.
Good, okay. Other strategies to navigate, number one. Don't worry about the titles, we can add them in after. So,
Ramping up contact with employers?
Yeah. What else is what other strategies? Let's just get maybe one strategy for each of the four, right? So scenario two, where COVID is contained, but we've got decreasing pipelines. The second one, scenario two, yep. Any strategies and tactics that came up to navigate this one?
Maybe adjusting programs according to what the students need.
Good, okay.
And I thought about increasing parents' knowledge and involvement.
Right, because it's a whole new world. So there's a different level of curiosity maybe?
Mm-hmm.
You know, interestingly, you may have less competition with other learning institutions if people don't want to travel far or they want to stick close to home, right? Scenario three. So we've got COVID not contained and we've got decreasing secondary, post-secondary. This is like the worst case scenario, really, right? How do we navigate that? Anybody have any ideas or thoughts that you jotted down on that?
The one thing here, I think, is just taking a look at the identified SMART goals and, you know, do we need to revise those to change the timelines, or you know, just re-strategizing to maintaining maybe versus increasing for a while?
Right. Or do you let some go, right? And put and really hone in and focus on others.
And to your point, what's needed in the community, you know, sort of like.
So maybe a strategy might be, you know, consulting with various stakeholders, like engaging input from. The other thing I would be watching for here is there may be different funding opportunities that are showing up when people start to realize that this isn't just going to go away, and we really have to help industries and or sectors navigate, right? There may be new funds available short term for innovation. Okay, last one. COVID not contained and increasing rates. Just give me one or two strategies.
I would say this was online instruction again, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, this is when you start focusing on life supports for students while they're post-secondary, things like childcare, job searching, support, because anytime somebody in their household gets sick, it's going to throw the whole household into crisis.
Right, right. So you got to take a more holistic wraparound support view.
Yep.
Beautiful. All right, I'm mindful of time. So what I want to do is just to wrap this up, if we can shrink it just like a percentage or two so you can see everything. What's strategically useful and helpful, the next step is you look, are there strategies that you see yourself relying on in every possible scenario? And in that case, those would be strategies that people would think of as robust. They're safe bets. You can put a lot of energy into them because they're going to serve you well no matter what happens, right? That's one. And then there are others that there's a very targeted and specific strategy, which is unique to one of the scenarios, but it's so critical that you might want to hedge your bets by doing some groundwork around it if that's where we end up going. You've kind of mapped it out a little bit. But I think the intent of the tool, the intent of the exercise, is to know that we don't know exactly what the future is going to hold, but draw from what people are most concerned about and use it to define a scenario that's tangible and real enough that we're planning as though we would navigate that. And that actually lessens people's anxiety overall, right? Because we know that we have options. And that's what the intent of this tool is. So what I would love, because we don't have tons of time left, I think we're almost over if we aren't already over, if people wouldn't mind just putting in the chat box any feedback about how this experience is and whether you can see opportunities where this sort of tool might be useful and helpful in your own work. So how might you use this tool, or what are you taking away from this exercise? Just type away into the chat box for us, just by way of wrap up. That would be great. And thank you so much, Megan, for doing such a great job.
Problem. I hope it's...
You're our next presenter too, I'm sorry. So we don't need to worry too much about running over because we're just going to jump on to another session.
From one to another, yeah. So we can actually sit with this a little bit if there are questions or comments as well. All right, thanks, Shane. Yeah, I like this. It makes the thinking clearer, easier, safer. So what we will do is we'll put a copy of the tool plus this kind of that we played with and the slide deck into the folder so you can all take a look at it. And just one ask of you all is that if you end up playing with this or using this in a different meeting or with a different group, I'd love to hear about it and how it goes. So thank you, everybody. It is fun to be with you.